Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa. My name is Michaela. I'm the event coordinator, one of the event coordinators, and also the store manager. And I just want to welcome you here tonight. Thank you for being here in store and online. Um, if you haven't been here before, this is Sankofa Video on Books. We were founded in 1998, and this is actually our 25th year anniversary. So, right. Yay! And it is also the 30th anniversary of the movie Sankofa, which you can stream online. Stream on Netflix. We're here today to talk about Getting on Code, a book written by Aaron Maybin, who's sitting here beside me. We're so happy to have him. A round of applause for Mr. Maybin, please. Thank you. I'm going to introduce him, and then we're going to hear a bit about his book. And if you have any questions, either online, I have my computer here, or out in the crowd, feel free to ask them. So Aaron Maybin is a 32-year-old art activist. Are you still 32? I don't know when this bio was written.
I am not. 33.
All right. Congratulations on another year. Aaron Maybin is a 33-year-old art activist and former professional football player from Baltimore City, Maryland. Selected as the 11th overall pick in the 2009 NFL draft by the Buffalo Bills as a former All-American defensive end at Penn State University. Aaron went on to play in the NFL for the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals in a 5-year career before making the decision to walk away from football to pursue a career as a professional artist, activist, author, educator, and community organizer. There were so many commas. Please give a round of applause for Mr. Maybin for being here. Can you please, one, tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a rundown of this book, which is so expansive. It's a medium-sized book, but it covers so much. He's talking about toxic masculinity, cancel culture, reparations, crime bill, Black unity. So please, give us a synopsis about yourself and the book.
Okay, we good? Okay, so for one, thank you guys for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Sankofa is definitely a stop that we knew that we had to make along this tour. You guys are historic. You guys are definitely one of the benchmark locations here in Washington, D.C. that, always has its fingerprint on the culture, So in dealing with a book with subject matter like this, I think that, there was no better place, to get the conversation started. With that being said, like she said in introducing me, my name is Aaron Maybin. I am a product of Baltimore City, Maryland. Formerly athlete, went to Penn State University and then drafted by the Buffalo Bills, played for the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals before deciding to do what I'm doing now full time, which is the art, which is the literature, which is the community organizing, which is the building, the actual work itself. This has been a big part of my life for some time, even back during my career. I still had a very large presence in Baltimore City in the education sector and as well as in the art sector. But long story short, when I got to the 5th year of my career, I realized that I could tell for some time, but I really was able to put my finger on the fact that I was not happy. I wasn't fulfilled. As much money as I was getting paid and as great of a profession as football is, it's something that we look up to and kind of idolize in childhood and say that, this is a lifestyle that I would love to have for myself. But after achieving that and realizing that my real passion was elsewhere, I was at a pivotal point where I had to make a decision. If I was going to be the kind of athlete I always fantasized about being, I was going to have to take a major step back from a lot of what I was doing in the community in order to just focus on the game. And inversely, if I was going to really have the kind of transformative impact that I wanted to have in the community, I realized that it was time for me to step away. So I chose the path that I think really speaks towards legacy. I think that if I was to drop dead right now and the greatest thing that somebody could say about me is that I was a damn good football player, it means I wasted a lot of time in my life. So I think that right now, this position that I'm in, not just as an artist, but as an educator, a builder, and an organizer, allows me to do so much more and allows me to have an impact on my community, my hometown, and communities like it across the country that I never would have had I just focused on this kids game that I used to play, But I'm definitely thankful for the opportunity. And in discussing this book, getting on code is similar to what it sounds. I think that our community, us as people of color in this country, there needs to be a code that we use when dealing with one another in community. There needs to be a certain type of time that we all are on, a code specific to us and how we move, how we live, and how we build community that governs how we move. You know, we can choose to look at our lives through a selfish lens that centers us as the individual, or we can look to adopt a model that centers the community, that centers communal health, that centers the communal healing that we know that we all need to find a way to, but actually has some pragmatic approaches to go about, you know, trying to achieve that. So what I did was in each chapter, I took an element of society that I feel as though we as people of color are out of code with one another. And I seek to give the blueprint that I use to do the work that I do in Baltimore and abroad, and use that as a starting point to start a communal conversation. After each chapter is a series of discussion questions that opens up a much larger and more robust conversation about what the answers need to be that we're organizing around, rather than just focusing on the solution. I mean, the problems in a deficit-based perspective. This seeks to change the conversation to an asset-based one and challenge us to put ourselves in the driver's seat of governing the direction that we want to see this movement go.
Thank you. That was a very extensive answer. Thank you. So getting into the book, your first couple chapters talk about cancel culture and toughening up, which touches on the culture of like taboos, a lack of free expression. So when do you feel like you're limiting your self-expression, or do you? And how have you addressed that?
All the time. And I feel like that's necessary. Y'all can hear me, right? Yeah. I don't think the microphone is necessarily necessary. I got a voice. So I don't think that it's always necessary for us to police everything. I think that we're getting to this age, this time where we're too focused on the deficit-based conversation rather than the asset-based one. You know, I come from a generation who my elders were always telling me growing up how my generation was going soft, how we were losing the grit that made our people and our community what it was. And I couldn't really understand that as a kid. But the older I get, the more gray hair that starts to pop up on my head, you know, I start to sound like that. Yeah, I'm starting to echo a lot of those same sentiments, which I don't think is a new thing. I think that over time, because of what our people have had to endure, you know, we're just getting to the point where our younger generations have the luxury of addressing certain things that our parents, our grandparents, and the rest of our ancestors didn't have the time or the necessity to. And I think that we have to acknowledge how we're standing on their shoulders to that in that sense. But I think that if we're going to be able to do the work that they weren't able to do, if we were going to be able to further that work, to take the baton, so to speak, and keep running with it, I think that it's necessary that we examine what went right, what went wrong. You know what I mean? What can be replicated, what needs to be changed, and how we go about doing that from a pragmatic perspective. You know, and I think that in the first couple chapters, I try to set a tone. I think the biggest connecting factor of all of these different lessons and ideas that I bring to the table is love. A communal love, a societal love, a cultural love that we have to be able, the love ethic that, you know, the likes of Bell Hooks and Cornel West and so many others have written about for years. But I don't think that we've taken enough time as a society to really dissect what that looks like in practice, you know, what it should look like and how we go about holding ourselves to that standard rather than lowering ourselves to the societal standard. The bare nature of the book is to examine whether or not this white supremacist framework that we all adopt when looking at society serves us when evaluating ourselves. So to speak, if we're going to be comparing ourselves to the white supremacists, then obviously we're going to end up replicating similar systems that won't serve us. So if we're not using them as the benchmark, what does need to be the benchmark? In my mind, that requires us to decolonize our own minds so we can go back to a more African-centric model of community education and so on and so forth.
So what does an Afrocentric community education look like to you?
So many things. I think that if we're just talking about community, it talks about dealing with things from the inside out more so than the outside in. You know, rather than the trickle down approach, the build the foundation from the ground up. So it starts with knowledge of self. It starts with self-love, because before I can love, you know, you as your man, I have to love myself, you know, first. Before I can love my child, I have to love myself first. Before I can love my community, I have to love myself first, and I have to know myself first. So that requires a certain amount of self-study, of self-critique, and of societal critique, where we go about the search of finding ourselves. And then once we're able to get comfortable with that language, you know what I mean, comfortable with that that self-love and that self-confidence, now we can pass that on to our children. Now we can educate ourselves differently. Now we know the missing pieces to the puzzle that we have to fill in ourselves when society leaves things out intentionally, you know, so that we end up not being fully formed, fully functioning human beings. We have to go about the practice of actually connecting those dots.
Absolutely. That sounds like self-determination to me. Sounds
Absolutely.
like know thyself.
Absolutely.
So in talking about examining and the language that we use to communicate with each other, your second chapter is called The Toxic Masculinity Myth.
Yes.
And you state there is absolutely nothing toxic about masculinity. I find it utterly maddening that we've gotten to the point in society where labels like this actually hold weight. Now, when I hear toxic masculinity, I hear something that's describing a type of masculinity that might be detrimental to the person and the larger community. Can you help someone like me understand why the term in general is a myth?
Because it speaks to that deficit-based perspective that I touched on earlier. Rather than zoning in on and platforming the type of masculinity we want to see replicated, we focus on the type of masculinity that shouldn't even be called masculinity in the first place.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
In my mind, again, going back to the master teachers, going back to the Bell Hookses and the Cornel Wests of the world and all of that have already gone into the ideology of this love ethic. It centers this idea of us granting ourselves the personhood that we were always deserving of. You know what I'm saying? And in that way, I think all of us are products of communities that we come from, where we knew loving men, where we knew comprehensive men, where we knew men that were partially the glue to that community and that society, right? But rather than platforming them and using them as the example of the type of masculinity we wish to see, we focus on what?
The negative aspects. We
focus on the men that don't display traits that are consistent with masculinity, but boyhood. You know what I mean? We platform people that have ideologies that are counterintuitive to what we actually need as a group, as a community. And my attempt in that essay is to just reframe that conversation. Rather than focusing on what isn't there, let's focus on what is there. Let's focus on the brothers that are setting an example of the type of fathers that we need to be. Comprehensive men that know when they need to be what they need to be. You know, one of the analogies I use in that essay is we tend to look at masculinity and maleness through the perspective of seeing men as a hammer. You know what I mean? And in my mind, a man that is a hammer is incomplete, you know, because a true man needs to be able to be strong and aggressive, but he also needs to be tender. He also needs to be compassionate. He also needs to be fair and just. All of these things are the type of aspects of masculinity that I think that we need to be platforming, right? Rather than focusing on the antithesis of that, in my mind, which isn't really real masculinity. In my mind, the greatest men are a Swiss Army knife. You know what I mean? Because if we need to become a hammer, we can be that. If we need to become a socket wrench, we can be that. If we need to become a knife, we can be that. You know what I'm saying? And if our families and our community and our partners need us to become those things, then we need to be able to adopt that skill set into our toolbox. But you have so many Black boys that are growing up not being equipped with the appropriate tools in that toolbox. So all they find themselves left with is a hammer. So what do? They break things. You know what I mean? We end up becoming a bunch of broken things that break more things because we were never taught how to have all these tools that we need to have in this box. So rather than focusing on the deficit-based conversation, let's focus on equipping our young Black boys with these tools. Let's focus on expanding this idea of masculinity to include all of the things that we used to tell Black boys not to do, not to cry, not to feel like they can express their emotions, to close themselves off to the world rather than opening themselves up to it. And I think that in a reframing of that discussion, we actually end up empowering our sons and vicariously our daughters, because when we raise whole boys, we don't have to raise our daughters to fear our sons.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer, very complete. And I mean, that goes into the relationship aspect that I was gonna ask you, like what type of foundation do you feel that we have right now as a Black community, as a Black family unit, what is missing from our foundation? Aside from what you just described with the men, on the female side of it, what are we missing? How can we be better equipped to create better family units?
Across the board, we're missing love. And I think that obviously it would be a lie for me to act like this myth of lovelessness that you see mass media produce about our community is authentic, but we're headed in that direction. You know what I mean? The love ethos that used to bind us has been eroded. And we've had a lot of help in that regard. The crack epidemic, you know what I'm saying? The economic disenfranchisement, the deindustrialization of America, and primarily cities like Baltimore, the city that I grew up in, where people like my grandfather were immigrants from the South, were dependent on those industrial jobs, didn't have an education for anything else. All of these societal factors weigh into it. But when you look at, the straw that breaks the camel's back, it's the lack of love. The second we start looking at one another as enemies, the second we start not to trust one another, the second I start to say, man, I gotta lock all of these doors rather than allowing my community and my neighborhood to have access to my home, to my services, to my resources, we start to lose. You know what I mean? So I think that all of it is connected, is interconnected, but I think that the source of it all is love. That's God. That is our source. That is our center. That's where there is no such thing as building community absent the love ethic. So I think that if we can begin to address that, then we begin to look at and reframe this entire conversation. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, the love is what allows us to see past the things that divide us. And there's so many bases for division, but at the end of the day, politics should never divide us. You know what I mean? Religion should never divide us. Geography should never divide us. Complexion should never divide us. We got to kill Willie Lynch, this light skin, dark skin. You know what I mean? And I think that we need to be more intentional about asking ourselves before we participate in these actions and behaviors, does this serve us as a collective? Forget me as an individual, because when we focus on ourselves as individuals, that's when we get co-opted against our interests. Because I can make it advantageous for you to sell your community out. I can make it advantageous to you financially to produce the lowest quality caricatures of yourself and give that to society. And you can do that for personal gain all day. But when you ask yourself, does this benefit us as a community? I think we hold ourselves to a different standard. That's the kind of standard that I want to see us acting on more often.
Got you. So we need to actually view ourselves as a community first, and then view ourselves as worthy enough to be a participant in that community. Then all of our actions will reflect that.
Yes, not just us, but everybody else. If I see myself as better than anybody in the community, I'm unfit to serve the community. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because we dehumanize one another the same way the patriarchal white supremacist structure, you know what I mean, discriminates against us. we revisit that same trauma upon one another. The second we start to look at it through that lens and understand that that's what we're doing, I want to believe that that once we know better, we'll be a little bit better about doing better. We'll be a little bit more intentional about how we talk to one another, about how we argue, because being able to argue is important. The art of conversation, being able to disagree without being violently disagreeable. We have to learn that, especially between our men and our women and our elders and our youth and all. Like, these chasms that exist between us are the barriers to our liberation, to our success, to our collective healing, to all of those things. Ego, greed, all of these things that are antithetical to how our roots, you know what I mean, were socialized, how our ancestors lived and practiced life, you know. So knowing that, we have to be intentional about going back to that source and reevaluating how we're living and the decisions that we're making.
Going back to that Afrocentric mind frame that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So be ready, okay? Out in the audience and online, I got you. So I'm going to go past the relationship aspect that we were just discussing and go into the political.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the crime bill and its impact on the Black community. And you also talk about voting independent. I want to know how those things interact with each other and how all those things and reparations can repair the damage that's been done to our community.
I don't know if reparations repairs the damage that's been done at all. You know what I mean? It never has, never will. You know, it doesn't erase any of the things that have been done. It doesn't take back any of the harm that's been visited upon us or our ancestors. What it does is it addresses things in a real way. You know, so many communities and cultures, not just in this country, but in the world, have been paid reparations for different atrocities that have been visited upon them. We deserve no less. We built this country for free with our sweat equity. You know what I mean? Any idea that anybody has in their mind of America being the greatest country in the world, it owes that debt to us. Not just in the beginning. You know, of course, we were essentially the economy as it was built. You know what I mean? So we were the capital in capitalism, you know, and still to this day, our greatest exports as a country are engineered by our community. Whether you look at the arts, whether you look at entertainment, whether you look at science, all of these things, we've always been there at the forefront. We've always been the engineers and the critical thinkers and the athletes and the entertainers and the storytellers, you know, the griots. We have been America's greatest resource since we arrived here in this country. And in spite of that, we have never been able to participate in this dream that it professes to the rest of the world, you know? And I think that the one thing that all Black people should be able to agree on is we are the conscience of America. Because until America does right by Black people, it can't profess to be any of the things it professes to be to the world. You can't be the world's judge and jury when you can't even judge yourself and your own actions. You can't be the world's moral compass when you have none. You know what I mean? You can't be somebody else's judge when the hypocrisy in this country is something that we can't atone for or act like we don't see. You know, so I think that we as a community have to not just have an understanding of history and all of those things, but we have to be pragmatic in how we create the solutions. Because nobody's coming to create them for us. Nobody is coming to drop checks in your bank account and, you know what I mean? And do it until we organize for it, until absent a demand, you know what I mean? What can we really do? You know what I'm saying? Beg for benevolence. When has that ever gotten us in?
But we continue to do it by this bipartisan voting we have. So
exactly.
Can't go more.
And we cannot continue to be these partisan pawns, you know what I mean, and somebody else's game when we are never the beneficiaries of the policy. We are never the beneficiaries of the sustained action, we are never the beneficiaries of the movement actually translating into tangible results. So that is something that we can't just keep on blaming other people for. We have to take responsibility in that. And I don't see us doing that without some kind of show of power and force. And like I said before, whether you're conservative or liberal, if you're Black, politics should never divide us. You know what I mean? Because the Republican Party is giving you nothing. Democratic Party is giving you nothing. They just come back every few years when it's time to vote again and make a whole bunch of promises.
I said they give you nothing with the dashiki on though. That don't make a difference for you.
If that ain't make you sick to your stomach, I don't even know what to say. And that's my thing. I don't care about symbolism. I don't care about, the ceremonious, gesture. Give me the cash. Give me the resources. Give me the land. Give me the opportunity. Miss me with the sentiment.
Show me the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the collective tone that we all need to be marching to.
How do we convince the diehard Democrats that we need to be independent? Like in your book, you say that it's your opinion that all Black people should vote independent, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we convince people to depart from their views?
I think by simply asking them what they've gotten in exchange for their vote. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, and when people start answering that question, usually what they find is that the things that they're citing benefit white America way more than it benefits us. So when you're asking specifically, what have we as a Black community gotten from this democratic loyalty that we've shown? And I'm not saying that the Republicans are any better. They're terrible. But as long as the Democratic Party knows that there is no other reasonable alternative, you know what I mean? And until the other independent and libertarian and central candidates and stuff like that start getting more support, then all we'll have is this two-party system. You know what I mean? So I'm just one of those guys that doesn't just concede that things have been this way, so that is the way that they will remain. Things will be as we make them. You know what I mean?
Can you say that again?
Things will be as we make them, as we as a community make them, and they will be what we allow them to be. So I think that the second we start to get more intentional about how we're moving, how we're operating, and again, we don't always have to agree with each other. I think that our disagreement can be beneficial. You know what I mean? That makes for a more robust conversation. That makes for a more comprehensive plan and Black agenda. I think that you can't just look at things through a liberal lens because liberals are too soft. You know what I mean?
Please go into detail. What you mean? Liberals are too soft. How so?
The first couple chapters of the book, we got to toughen up. That wasn't for Republicans. You know what I'm saying? And by nature, Republicans, of course, are soft. There's a bunch of snowflakes out there and all that kind of stuff. But by and large, they have much more of a personal responsibility. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps type of mentality. I don't think that that's all the way wrong. You know what I mean? And I think that I don't want to live in a society that's so liberal and so sanitized, that so worried about walking on eggshells that we're and hurting people's feelings that we become less authentic. I want insulting people out there. You know what I mean? I want people out there that push buttons and push the envelope and challenge us. You know what I mean? We need our Dave Chappelle's. You know what I'm saying? We need these people out there. And I don't want to live in a community where everybody is politically correct. No, that's not what America is. You know what I'm saying? I think that America's dream is closer to a nightmare for Black people, but I think that the most beautiful thing about America is the idea of America. The idea of America is a beautiful one. The idea of this free and democratic and open society that is accepting of differences, and you know what I'm saying, and still challenges ourselves to innovate. You know what I mean, and critically make the world into a better place. I think that all of those things are great, but I think that we have to look at them through a realistic lens. You know what I mean? And I think that if we're really being true about what the idea of this country is, we need both sides in order to make it happen. And if anybody should be able to overlook differences and work together, it should be our Black Americans. I expect the white folks not to be able to get along.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But we done been through too
Been too
much.
much. Yeah.
We done been through too much just to let partisanship, you know what I'm saying, or local policy or gender or religion or any of these things get in the way of our collective freedom, our collective liberation. I think that if we allow those things to get in the way of us, we're not deserving of the freedom that we're working towards.
Thank you. So now we're going to open it up to the floor. Do we have any questions out there before we get to the end of the book discussion? There you go.
Yes, sir.
First of all, how you doing? Appreciate your presentation, brother.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The second one's kind of loaded, so
Yeah.
I'll ask the first one first. First question I had was, I think Shannon Sharp or Deion Sanders was speaking about how a lot of, I guess, football players that may have the same ambition as you or the same passion as you kind of lose themselves in their career instead of focusing on perfecting their craft, and then once they build a platform, utilizing that platform to kind of begin doing the work, per se. I'm not in football, but I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on that. And my second question was, I'm actually an engineer, 24, just graduated not too long ago.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it. One of the reasons that I'm kind of in this craft is utilizing the skills of being understanding in different scientific endeavors to be able to kind of help with building the resources we actually need versus just talking about it, relatively speaking. So I wanted to know if you were familiar with cities that are already cities or counties that are already putting in the work to create that Black Wall Street environment for us when it comes to like modern Black people. And that's on the technical, it's on the technology side, it's on the historical education side, the arts. What areas are actually already doing that work? Even when it comes to like renewable energy that we possibly could not get access to because of our lack of education in that field. So.
Right. That's two great questions. Thank you, brother. So to address the first one, I've been keeping up with a lot of the back and forth, a lot of the movement that's happening. What happened at Jackson State, what's happening at Bethune-Cookman with Ed Reed and all. To address using building up your platform and using it, theoretically, that sounds good. One, they don't actually want any of the guys in the league doing that. That's one. And two, who shows you how to do that? Serious question. Who shows you? No. Like these athletes, right? We say these things kind of like catchphrases, kind of like, focus on the main thing for now, build up your platform, and then use it to help your community. How? You know what I mean? Like I was first round draft pick. I played on some great teams with some great players. I didn't know too many athletes that didn't have their own foundation. I didn't know too many athletes that didn't have a charitable arm of their endeavors that they utilize towards helping. Most of us, almost all of the players, especially players of color in the league, we come from hard environments. We come from rough communities. We come from places that need a lot of help. And a lot of us grow up thinking that we're the ones that are supposed to change all of that. The problem is nobody ever teaches you how. I was fortunate enough to have some amazing elders, some amazing mentors in my life that taught me how to serve. My first couple years in the league, I'm coming back to Baltimore, at 20 years, I left school, I was 20 years old. I wasn't even legal yet. You know what I'm saying? And I signed my first contract, and I'm ignorant enough to believe at the time that, these millions of dollars I have coming my way is going to be enough for me to change my whole city. I was ignorant enough to really believe that. I didn't even know. I was so ignorant about money when I first got drafted that I actually thought my contract was my contract. I hadn't factored taxes or any of the rest of that stuff into it. Half of it's already spent in my mind. And I'm like, hold up. You mean I'm not, let's just say it was $1 million check. You mean I'm not getting $1 million? I'm getting like 400,000 or 500,000. What is it? Who got the rest of my money? You know what I'm saying? That's what we're dealing with from an education standpoint. And I was by far not a dumb jock or not an ignorant person, but I never grew up with access to money. I never grew up with proximity to capital. You know what I mean? So I never learned those lessons. So as a 20-year-old, I was paying a white dude and a black dude that I had never met before to tell me how I should be spending my money. You know what I mean? Little things like one of the guys that was helping to manage my money at the time, he owned a bank, right? He owned his own bank. And I always used to wonder why, like, they were so gung-ho about making sure that I kept a certain amount of my money in the bank. Not knowing that, let's just say I have $1 million in this bank. You know how much money that allows him to go out and get insured, you know what I'm saying, from the federal government, that he can go and do all of these things with? But because we're ignorant to that, I'm serving somebody else's purposes instead of my own. I'm building up generational wealth for somebody else's children. And nobody's teaching me how to do it for myself. All they're saying is stay in this budget that we create for you. That doesn't teach a young brother nothing about actually saving money, mastering economics. But they don't want you to empower yourself. They don't talk about group economics. They don't teach you how to save. They don't teach you how to invest. They expect you to blow through your money like everybody else does so that you'll be desperate whenever it comes time for you to sign your name on another contract. You know what I'm saying? They want you taking less than your own market value because you need the actual funds for your day-to-day life. You know what I'm saying? So when I started to understand that, I realized that I had to start educating myself about these things. And then you got to ask yourself, how many guys that are in that position are actually willing to do that work now, are willing to go out and study finance, study math, and study all of it. I was always an English guy. I write all the books in the world. Don't ask me to build the math curriculum. Don't ask me, you know what I'm saying? What I know. That's not my ministry. But what if, when I was younger, I had people that were telling me how important it was for me to prioritize these things? You know what I mean? So I think that the model is wrong. I think that the fact that most of the kids that I know that I work with in Baltimore that are good athletes, there's a pipeline that already exists for them, right? I can put them with an AAU team. I can put them with a coach. I can put them with a trainer that can teach them all of the professional workouts and all of the things to prepare your body for what it's going to experience at the next level. Where's the pipeline for a kid that we see that's a leader that we think should be our next politician or a next circuit court judge? You know what I'm saying? Like, where's the high school or middle school incubator, right, that we throw them in where they get a chance to intern with the city council, where we get their scholarship money for college, and then they come back to our community in the summertime. They have to actually serve, you know what I mean, with our legislative policy makers, with our nonprofit sector. You know what I'm saying? Like, we could be grooming politicians that we can trust and believe in, but where are our priorities? You know what I mean? So, again, I think that if you're going to be wasting time talking about something, you should be building in that area. So just as much as I talk about what our education system isn't doing, I've created curriculum that is being taught not just in Baltimore, but in cities across the country. I've created, we've built a rec center in Baltimore City that just got a $20 million investment from the Baltimore Ravens and Under Armour. So now we're going to be expanding our building to be the size of a school. You know what I'm saying? And then anybody that knows me can already know where it's headed after that. But at the end of the day, we can't just be talking about problems. I can't just be complaining. I got to be able to say, this is how I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty based on my network, based on the resources that I have to bear, based on the desire I have in that area to see something happen. I think that we need to make more examples of these replicatable models that we can be using. So to answer your second question about specifically like in the tech space, in the art space, engineering space, in Baltimore City specifically, we've got amazing innovators, not just myself, people like Brittany Young, who has an organization called Baltimore B360, uses dirt bike life and culture. And anybody that knows Baltimore knows how big dirt bike life is down there. She uses dirt bike life and culture to introduce kids to engineering and STEM, which is one of the most innovative practices I've ever seen, because our kids buy in immediately and they don't even realize they're being brainwashed in a positive angle. But solutions like that are what we need to be creating. You know what I'm saying? Another leader we have in Baltimore, a lady named Erica Bridgeford, who created the Baltimore Ceasefire Movement, which was a movement that the community just kind of came together and said, this weekend, nobody's going to kill each other. Now, obviously, did it always work? No. But the awareness that it started has blossomed into something now that is citywide. And now she's the head of the Baltimore Community Mediation Center. And we've been a part of legislative policy that I wrote about in the book that actually is going to lead to a reimagining of how 911 even is operated in the first place. Because most of the time that a police officer is called, somebody else is really supposed to be responding. You know what I mean? Somebody in the mental health field, somebody in the social services field, somebody that can actually bring about solutions to the problems. But after the police are called, the crime has already been committed. Now we're reacting rather than being proactive. So what does it look like to be investing in these community models? We have a organization called Safe Streets, where they go into the prisons and the gangs and they take former gang leaders and put them in positions to community mediate, you know what I mean? And go in and prevent crime before it starts because they know who the key players are. You know what I mean? We need to be looking at sustainable models that reduce harm, you know what I mean? That bring equity into our communities and will actually address the root causes of the problem instead of just looking at chopping branches off of a tree and expecting the disease on the tree still not to spread. You know, so I think that we have to be more vigilant and we have to be more creative in how we go about attacking these problems, because the solutions, if they already existed, we wouldn't still be here. You know what I mean? So what's been done before isn't going to work for us today. So we need to be studying what was happening in the past, seeing what elements of that we can keep in the models that we use and what elements need to be changed. Absolutely.
Sorry.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, but my second question was more so like, which you kind of mentioned towards the end, certain things that were done in the past. When you look at communities like Tulsa or even Harlem in the
Oh yeah, from the economics perspective, right?
Just kind of overall, what areas right now are currently making those transitions to where our culture in so many different facets, whether that's whether that's education, whether that's historical, or whether that's arts. A lot of people would probably think Atlanta right now if they thought of like a modern, quote unquote, not black utopia.
Oh, you're asking for what areas in the city are actually in the country are actually practicing these things and all of that.
It's
Yeah.
hard to federalize kind of our, not black experience, but also just like kind of black progress on the federal level, because there's so many different areas. So kind of on those local levels, what areas are kind of already making those initiatives towards?
I think that tech and STEM is a huge area for us because we've been so marginalized and locked out in terms of our access to it, right? So that's an area that we focus in on pretty heavily at my rec center. We've done coding classes, we've done architecture and design classes. These are all in our through our STEM fields. We have a computer lab, we have iPads and different technology for every kid to utilize. We're getting ready to get a 3D printer and start doing classes there. So I think that when we talk about access and equity, I think that the tech and the STEM field is an area that we need to be focusing on because basically in the next 20, 30 years, I don't think that there will be too many jobs that get created that don't have a baseline requirement of you being proficient in certain skills in that field. You know what I mean? And because our schools are typically the ones that lack the most access to science and technology, we need to be looking at from a communal perspective how we supplement that, right? So it's like certain things education-wise, right? We know that this white supremacist system is not going to educate our kids in certain areas. So what are the communal models that we're setting up to supplement that education from a science and technology standpoint, from an arts standpoint, from a literacy standpoint, and all of those things? I tend to steer towards community models rather than like federal models, because I think that there's a certain amount of accountability that is maintained from a communal level that isn't maintained from a federal level. And I think that it's always better to start building in-house one of the major reasons that we just got this sizable investment in my rec center in Baltimore was because of the fact that they saw myself and my partner, another former athlete, get up with our own resources and start doing something that other people had been talking about doing for years. You know what I mean? So it's almost like when your car breaks down on the side of the road, if you're sitting around calling your homies and, you know, hitting AAA up and everything, you might be sitting there waiting for hours. But if you get out and start pushing that joint, I guarantee you after a certain amount of time, somebody's going to pull over and help you. You know what I'm saying? So when you look at things from an economics perspective, one of the chapters touches on that. I want to kind of break down and make it more common practice for us just to start doing these things, these principles, specifically in group economics, in a communal and a family level, right? One of the things that we did was in my personal family, you know, I challenge my parents and my siblings to start putting in money with me every month. Let's just say we all gonna put in 50. You know what I'm saying? And if somebody in that group, if we know that, you know, the July or August month is gonna be rough for you bills wise, or you have something coming up that's gonna require some attention, okay, now we have a pool of money that we can use to address that. Now we have a pool of money that we can use when it's time for one of my younger siblings to go out to college. Now we have a pool of money that we can use to invest in my sister's startup business that she wants to do with her nails. You know what I mean? Like all of these things, they're pragmatic approaches that we could be taking that have worked before for so many people and continue to work for certain cultures and communities to this day. But we're not going to see it happen on a mass scale until you start to see it happen household by household. We're a show me type of people. So the second somebody starts to see what me and my family are doing with our group economics in the household, now they want to get involved. You know what I mean? Now they want to do it with their family. Now the whole side of the city eventually is doing it. Now we actually are able to utilize that money now for something that is centered around the community and not just our family or our household. You know what I mean? So I'm just one of those guys where I don't think that Rome has to be built in a day. I'm not one of those guys. I think that a lot of times when we think about how we want to see society change, we look at it through these grandiose lenses, through these grandiose lenses, right? We see the macro, we see the big organization that needs to get built. We see the college, we see, you know what I mean, the finished product, but we don't see the little shack of a room that we can start it in and it can become that. You know what I mean? So my whole thing is let's get started. Let's start the process. If there's something that God has put on your heart to see into fruition, create it. Even if you're creating the most early stage sketch or blueprint or idea of it, every single one of our religious texts tells us to write the idea down, make it plain, and then go out and take it. You know, and I think that if we start to apply that at a communal level, I think that we're going to see a whole lot of transformation come from that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really thorough. Yes, thank you. Do we have another question in the back? No. Okay, we have one question online. Well, first we have a comment from Ross Tula. They just said, "Bless up, Edrin and Sidney." Just giving you kudos for being here.
Thank you. Sure.
We have another one from Dizzy Bird. How did you start the process of writing your book?
Oh man, that's a good question. With a lot of hard conversations. I think that, as I said earlier, I settled in on these chapters because I wanted to look at and zero in on the areas of our culture that I felt like we were the most out of code with one another. So a lot of these chapters and a lot of the process of writing this book stemmed from the most toxic arguments I saw taking place at the time. You know what I mean? Like all of the arguments and conversations that I felt like were counterproductive to the direction that we needed to be going. And again, I'm one of those people that doesn't try to focus on the negative. It's like, all right, if that's what the most toxic version of this conversation looks like, what's the conversation that's going to bring us closer together? What's the conversation that's going to bring about that communal healing? And it came to me that one of the things that I write about in the book, and I think that is a life principle of mine, is I don't believe that anything can be achieved until it can first be imagined, right? You need your people that are creative enough to imagine something that hasn't been before, something that hasn't been created before, that hasn't existed before. We have to be creative enough to see a better way. But then you need people that are courageous enough to go out into the world and make it happen. You know what I'm saying? Like, and those are not always the same person. The idea person is not always the boots on the ground front lines person, but you need all of those people. Just like in a war, you need your Navy, you need your Air Force, you need your infantry, you need all of these things to be working, and you don't need the Air Force to be trying to do the Navy's job. So my whole thing is once I was able to zone in on what the problems are, how do we model for people what a healthy version of that dialogue looks like? You know what I mean? How do we bring the love ethic back into the discussion through how we frame the argument or the debate in the first place? You know what I mean? And I think that that process for me made the writing a lot easier because I wasn't trying to preach to people. I wasn't trying to center myself as some kind of moral judge and jury of how we move. But I do know that what I've been able to accomplish over the last decade or so has been something that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish any of without the perspective that I utilize in how I move in the community. And if me sharing that could help other people do similar work in their hoods, then what could we get accomplished? You know what I mean? So that was the main impetus for me starting the process of writing. And it just got easier and easier as I had more of those hard conversations to figure out where that love ethic, you know what I mean, had to move in order for us to make some progress.
Got you. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the program. We are having an open mic, and I heard that you were going to do a poem. That's what I heard.
How much longer before the open mic starts?
We're going to get there. It's supposed to start at 7, so about.
Okay, I might be able to bless y'all with something before I go.
Okay. But before you do that, though, I do want to ask, like, what do you want to leave the audience with about your book? So, because listening to you, you're so solution oriented. I don't want people to feel a little overwhelmed with all the different topics we touched on. So, what do you want to leave us with?
This book is not for the college intellectuals. You know, it's not written for white gaze. It's not written for white acceptance. I think that a lot of the principles in it can benefit other marginalized communities in their fight towards some of the same goals. But I think that too often times we look at trying to bring everybody into the house for a closed door conversation that we need to be having with each other. And this book was my attempt at having that conversation with my people. I think that sometimes we focus so much on academia and we focus so much on what colleges are adopting this, what major white audiences are stamping this with their seal of approval. I don't care about that. Not with this project. This project was for us. And when I say us, I mean the dudes on the corner just as much as I mean the dudes in classrooms. I mean the people behind bars in prison system just as much as I mean the people that are free, the people that are housed just as much as the people that are homeless. I think that the second that we start to see all of us as being family, as being loved ones, as being beloved, we get closer towards a shared communal liberation. But the second that we buy into the elitism, this capitalist-driven mindset that a lot of us operate around, we're going to continue to replicate systems that don't serve us. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention today. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, the conversation is consistent.
This has been Getting Untold by Aaron Maybin. You can purchase the book here at Sankofa, and if you're online, you can purchase it on our website. Please go out and get this book. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And while we still have you on a live stream, you want to spit something now?
Sure. I can spit a little something.
Move out the way.
Matter of fact, where's art activism? All right. All right, I'm about to read a selection out of my first book, Art Activism, also available. This book is a collection of my artwork, poetry, essays, photography, just kind of a full representation of what it looks like to use your artwork as a tool, you know, not just for social justice, but for seeing our communities and our narratives represented. So this piece right here is entitled "See Me." It's the first poem that you read when you open the book. When I walk into a room, a vision appears in your mind, painting me loudly and vividly in the colors of my history, which, from your point of view, often resembles the hue of criminality. It's no mystery why you mistreat me. You see me only as you wish to see, judging me so unjustly. But the vision that you see looks so much differently to me. The skin you see, I own it proudly, wearing the palette of my past written in chocolate, honey, and ebony tones, of royalty in the first degree, shimmering with the Afro sheen of Black excellence personified in humanity of who I am and what I and mine are still yet to be. Proud indeed I am, and always shall I be, presenting first my words to you, painted prophecies still to see. The painfully honest truth buried deep inside your false reality. The roots of my prose go deep, far beyond the existential moment you truly believe you can see. But the depth of this ocean will drown you if you still can't see what lies beneath. So before you step into the rhythm of my beating drum, before you dance or riff to the sweet dark tones of my Black Boy blues, take a moment or two to decipher the hieroglyphic scripts etched into your monolithic walls as I break each one down like a sinking ship, giving my precious truth to you. I don't step softly. I don't speak lightly. I don't shrink so that you might seem taller. I don't simplify my mind so that you might seem smarter. I am me, unapologetically. The songs I sing echo loudly and deeply in the roots of royal Ashanti blood, the incantation of divine Shan healers, and the strength of hooded Moorish horsemen, the seeds of Zulu kings, and the dreams of Ethiopian queens, the heart of street hustlers, from Baltimore to Ivory Shores, the souls of those long thought to be long lost in the dark of our yesterdays, but yet today, reborn in radiant light, relit to illuminate the pathway to all of our proud tomorrows. Ashe.
Ashe.